Yeah, I would say that the moment that you walk into a locker room, people view you as a threat. And the first thing you have to do, despite trying to create kind of these organic relationships and friendships, you have to prove that you can play. And I think every team that I walked into, there was kind of a hierarchy. In the beginning, I was the youngest. I was the youngest by far. So I had to prove that I could play. And once I earned that respect, I think ultimately you start to kind of be invited to lunches, to dinners, to families' houses. You become kind of these organic friends. Go out to have a drink after the games. But then when you become more of an established player, you're a real threat. You go from kind of being that little brother that people want to put an arm around and help and kind of guide you to, yeah, man, like, I like you, you're cool and everything, but like, you're playing in my position. You're taking my job. And I'll give you a quick story. So when I first was about to turn pro with the under 20 US national team, they had already qualified for the World Cup in Malaysia in 1997. And I came in and I took one of the starting center back jobs. And that player who got them into qualification to play in Malaysia was out of the squad. And he was a really popular guy. And it was really difficult because I liked him a lot, but I wanted to obviously play in Malaysia. I wanted to be a part of that team, and I ultimately was. Fast forward 2 years later, we're at Glasgow Rangers in the offseason for 3 months. He's my roommate for 3 months. And we had to have this conversation about how angry he was about it. And it wasn't my fault, but it was my fault. And like, it was a wild time. So it kind of helped me as a 20-year-old, 21-year-old player really truly understand that there's a bond and your teammates and you're all kind of playing for the crest on your jersey, but at the same time, you're battling every single day to prove that you deserve to play, and it's money and it's finances and it's bonuses, it's opportunity, it's bigger contracts, it's better teams. So yeah, it was a complex kind of environment that I always found myself in.
The VAR Show. The one place for your weekly football update.
Hello, a very warm welcome to the VAR show. The show which talks about all the various major football leagues in detail. Today we are going to continue with interviews. And whom do we have today? We have former New England Revolution and former Columbus Crew player. In fact, he holds the record for being, I think, the first player to be on the roster of 7 different teams in MLS. We have none other than Mr. Brian Dunseth with us. So without wasting much time, I would like to first thank Brian for coming on the show. Thank you and welcome to your show. And I would like to begin by asking you, how are you and what are you doing these days?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to chat a little footy with you. And I can't complain. Everything's good over here.
So, we'll talk about a lighter topic, that is football, in comparison to what's happening all around the world right now. And I'll talk about your career, from captaining the US Olympics team at Sydney to playing for so many. I think you played for around 7, or at least you're in the roster for 7 teams in the USA. How has the journey been for you?
It was a wild ride. I think for me, the way I kind of viewed my career was the importance off the field, kind of the cultural understanding and living amongst so many different people. Going to Sweden, playing in Europe, I think it was vitally important for me kind of as a human being, because I just didn't want to use the game just to play and be in one spot. I think very, very few times in a player's career you can see them stay at just one club and be kind of a lifer. For me, I was kind of one of those journeymen, as you said, that I guess it was a double-sided compliment. I was good enough that teams wanted me, but I was not good enough that teams wanted to keep me. So it was quite the journey, being from Southern California, going to Boston, going to Miami, going to Columbus, going to Dallas, going to Europe, coming back to Salt Lake City and ending in LA. Quite the journey. And I always wanted to play in front of my family and friends back in Los Angeles. And it lasted probably about a month and a half before I had to call time on my career. So it was it was something that I look back on with fond experiences, and I think as important as the games and the playing itself, which was unbelievable. I'm very, very proud of the relationships that I was able to have throughout the course of my career that to this day I still have with a bunch of my teammates.
You have played for so many teams. What was the biggest problem? Shifting from one team to the another, like at such a short interval, in the sense that even a year or two is a short interval at a club.
Yeah, I would say that the moment that you walk into a locker room, people view you as a threat. And the first thing you have to do, despite trying to create kind of these organic relationships and friendships, you have to prove that you can play. And I think every team that I walked into, there was kind of a hierarchy. In the beginning, I was the youngest. I was the youngest by far. So I had to prove that I could play. And once I earned that respect, I think ultimately you start to kind of be invited to lunches, to dinners, to families' houses. You become kind of these organic friends. Go out to have a drink after the games. But then when you become more of an established player, you're a real threat. You go from kind of being that little brother that people want to put an arm around and help and kind of guide you to, yeah, man, like I like you, you're cool and everything, but like you're playing in my position. You're taking my job. And I'll give you a quick story. So when I first was about to turn pro with the under-20 U.S. national team, they had already qualified for the World Cup in Malaysia in 1997. And I came in and I took one of the starting center back jobs. And that player who got them into qualification to play in Malaysia was out of the squad. And he was a really popular guy. And it was really difficult because I liked him a lot, but I wanted to obviously play in Malaysia. I wanted to be a part of that team, and I ultimately was. Fast forward 2 years later, we're at Glasgow Rangers in the offseason for 3 months. He's my roommate for 3 months. And we had to have this conversation about how angry he was about it. And it wasn't my fault, but it was my fault. And like, it was a wild time. So it kind of helped me as a 20-year-old, 21-year-old player really truly understand that there's a bond and your teammates and you're all kind of playing for the crest on your jersey, but at the same time, you're battling every single day to prove that you deserve to play, and it's money and it's finances and it's bonuses, it's opportunity, it's bigger contracts, it's better teams. So yeah, it was a complex kind of environment that I always found myself in.
So you played for so many teams. Where did you have the most fun, according to you, in your experience?
Great question. So the most fun I had as a group, it was like a brotherhood. It was on the Olympic team. It was that was actually the game. That was a bronze medal match against Chile behind me, and Bam Bam Zamorano. We were both the captains, and afterwards we kind of exchanged jerseys. That was just a 3.5 year experience of kind of building on Malaysia from the Under-20 World Cup and into the 2000 Olympics. And it was because of our manager, Clive Charles, who sadly passed away from cancer right after the Olympics. It was just kind of this environment where we were all the same age. We were just all fighting for the same thing. And, I think when people view the U.S. national team, especially now after missing out on the 2018 World Cup, there was kind of a source of inspiration, like an underdog mentality, where every day we stepped on the field, we knew we had to prove to everybody that we weren't just the Americans, that we just didn't fight hard and we were fit, that we could actually play. And so that was probably the most fun. Domestic, it's hard to top playing for the Miami Fusion and Ray Hudson and that group of players, because the city, the area, on top of, the nightlife and the culture, but then on the field, we were by far the best team that year. And I think that was probably, collectively the most fun group of players that I played with in Major League Soccer.
So like how you said, you captained the team in the Olympics, but I think you did not get the success you would have hoped for with the senior team. So do you look back with regret?
Not regret. I think disappointment. I've actually used this analogy a couple of times. I would say it's like everything in life. there's always goals that you want to achieve. There's a job that oh man, that'd be amazing one day if I could be in that job, or hey, if I got this job, this would make me feel incredible. It was kind of always like that as a young player. First, I want to make the high school team. Then I want to make the all league, and I want to be all CIF, or I want to be all region or all state. Then I want to go to college, and then I want to, play for the national team. I want to be a pro player. So yeah, all of those were important. When I look back, there's guys that have more talent in their pinky toe than I had my entire body, but I wanted it. And when I first got my first experience before the '98 World Cup in France, I was the young kid. It was like I was being kind of groomed for the opportunity behind guys like Alexi Lalas and Marcelo Balboa and Eddie Pope. But I was too young at the time. I was 20 years old. These were established guys. Then after the Olympics, I was disappointed because I always felt like it was the natural progression that I would go from being captain of the Olympic team and kind of just not waltz into the World Cup team, but have that opportunity. But still, you had Tony Sana, you had Eddie Pope, now Greg Berhalter, who's the full national team head coach. Those were kind of the established guys in front of me. And maybe if Clyde Charles would have taken the job as a national team coach, maybe I would have had 30, 40, 50 caps. I don't know. I think it was a total of like 15 camps. And I always joke around with Bruce Arena. Every time I was about to go on and get my international debut, something happened. There was an injury. There was a red card. There was like a yellow card that cost the player the next game. And there was like 3 occasions where I'm standing up next to the 4th official and he's about to put the signboard up. And it's like, Tony, come on back. And I'm like, ah. And so, yeah, it's like an itch you can never scratch. But I mean, listen, if that's the one thing I can't check off on my playing career, I think I'm just fine because I'm one of many millions that never had the opportunity to play or participate in the World Cup.
So, from the time you played in the MLS, just around 2006 retired, the game has moved on a lot. You had David Beckham come over in 2007, then Zlatan, then a lot of high-profile players. How has the game evolved from that time? Because you have been involved with a lot of punditry and analysis. How has the game evolved?
I think it's the natural evolution of any league. Over the course of 10 years, you're going to see a significant change. I would kind of equate it to the influx of foreign talent, both on the field and in the managers over in the Premier League. Just how kind of the old Premier League in like the early 90s completely transformed with kind of the influx of foreign talent. David Beckham, in my opinion, my humble opinion, was the architect of the transformation and the growth of Major League Soccer. And he'll still to this day probably not get the respect that he deserves because MLS went from kind of this to this and it just took off. And it's still, MLS is in kind of a unique environment because you're right, from David Beckham to Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard to Thierry Henry and Rafa Marquez to Didier Drogba to Zlatan to Wayne Rooney. There's always been, and the league's only 25 years old. This is supposed to be year 25. It's kind of finding its feet of, are they a league that's still trying to bring players in to build kind of the size of the league, put the eyeballs on the league? Because David Beckham and Zlatan are the only players that, from Hollywood to music to, it doesn't matter, race, color, nationality, sexual orientation, they were kind of the binding force to draw the attention to Major League Soccer. So now I think we're seeing kind of a switch where, yes, if you still have a Zlatan or you have I call them the unicorns. If you still have a unicorn that can come to MLS, perfect, fine. Each city, each team's different. But we're seeing kind of a younger shift to where, like the Miggy Almirons, who are now at Newcastle United, those type of players where they come and they see Major League Soccer not as a deterrent, but as still an opportunity to maybe go on to Europe. And I don't think there's anything wrong with, you look at Argentina, you look at Brazil, fantastic leagues, incredible national teams, even France. But you shouldn't be afraid to be a selling league. And I think that's the next evolution for Major League Soccer, is to recognize that you can still be a really good league and people still want to be a part of it. But you can also sell players because the one thing that people fail to acknowledge, in my view, is Major League Soccer has one fatal flaw, and it's not their problem. It's not their fault. It is their problem, but it's not their fault. It's that they don't get to participate in Champions League. And so when you can't participate in Champions League, that's the golden goose. That's Tuesday and Wednesday nights. That's what every young player outside of a World Cup, that's what every young player aspires to play in. And that's kind of the byproduct and the dichotomy of the argument that you're getting older players that are past, quote unquote, their prime because they've walked away from Champions League or Europa League.
So, of course, this will be a very difficult question for you to answer right now, but do you think will it ever be on par with the European top league? Because, for me, I see it, you either have players who have passed their prime, or you can call them as, it might be disrespectful, but a reject, like a Giovinco. He was basically a castaway who got paid a lot of money and he came over. He then used it as a stepping stone to go out. Similar with, I think, with Wayne Rooney. He moved there, again moved back. Do you think that MLS should promote their own youth instead of getting this huge, maybe a little bit slightly past their prime players who will, of course, bring the light to the league, but it might not help the league in the long run?
Yeah, it's, again, a great question. So let's use Giovinco, for example. At the time, was a part of the Italian national team, was primarily either being loaned out in Serie A or utilized as a spark off the bench for Juve. When you give him $6 million, I mean, that's tough, right? Like, how would you turn down six? It was kind of like before China and China money coming in, the incredible amounts of pay packet, $300,000-$400,000 a week. For players that you look like, you're like, he's not really worth that. For Giovinco, it was worth it in Major League Soccer because it wasn't that he brought the attention to the league. It was that he was such a good player and he was such a dynamic player. And we saw kind of a pivot in Major League Soccer right around that timeline with guys like Clint Dempsey and Josie Altidore and Michael Bradley to bring them back. But to pay them probably 2 to maybe 3 times more of what they were making in Europe. And for me still, and I've told Michael this, for Michael Bradley to leave Roma at the time, I was bitterly disappointed only because he was one of those players that I thought could kind of shine a light on American players and be in Champions League. And I thought that was important for kind of young American players to kind of have this goal, have this iconic face representing them on Tuesday and Wednesday nights. Wayne Rooney is an interesting conversation because, at Wayne's downfall, leaving, and I call it downfall, I use that term loosely, leaving Man United and going to Everton. At the time, he was essentially kind of frozen out by the manager, and I think it kind of shows the complexity of a conversation about when players decide to leave and go on a new adventure, because much like Steven Gerrard, players decide when their time is done. If I say to you, you're done, this is your last paycheck, you're gonna be like, what? I can still play. I'm better than him, I'm better than him, I'm better than him. And you almost get angry about it. Wayne coming, I think he had when he first came, I think he had all the respect to see out the end of his contract. But again, it shows the complexity of not just the player playing in the league, but the family maybe not settling and the wife not. Same thing happened with Steven Gerrard in Los Angeles, and one of the reasons why he cut his stay short. So, I mean, as we all know, when you have a wife and you have children and you take them out of a comfortable environment and you throw them into a completely different culture, they're missing their family members, they're missing kind of their local pubs, their local diners, just the culture that they're used to. It's tough and it's difficult. So back to your original question, yes, it's finding that balance, because Major League Soccer has invested over $500 million across the board in development academies and youth infrastructure, as well as soccer-specific training facilities that are out of this world. I mean, I talked to a bunch of the guys that come over from Europe, and they say they're on par with like the elite, like the Man City, the Liverpool, the Man United, the Real Madrid, the Barcelona. But then if you ask the guys that kind of play underneath those like iconic teams, they'll say, these are the best facilities I've ever had an opportunity to play in. So I think they're trying, but again, it's 25 years versus competing with these leagues that have 100 years underneath their belt.
So like I'll add one more question to on the previous question. Do you think like it is better to bring maybe a manager who is maybe even past his prime, who can influence the game more than a player who's past his prime?
I think we're starting to see it again. I remember when Ruud Gullit came over to the LA Galaxy, and it was after Chelsea, it was after Newcastle. He comes over and he goes, "I want that player. Can't have that player. Well, I want that player. Can't have that. But well, I want to buy this player. You can't have that player," because the rules were so complex and dynamic. Now I think there's enough of an infrastructure. You have the owner, you have a technical director, you have a general manager, you have an assistant sporting director, that they kind of handle all of the outside noise. With what we have here is the USL is the league right under Major League Soccer. And that's kind of like the young development league. Then you have the academy underneath that. You have 5 to 6 teams. And sometimes you have an NWSL, a women's league, that's attached to the parent club, to Major League Soccer. And now I think with all of that infrastructure behind the scenes and having 5, 6, 7 different people actually working at the club, it alleviates the pressure on managers coming in. And I think in the last 3 years, and this is also in the U.S. national team, one of the problems in America is we're such a big country. We want to be one year Brazilian, or we want to be Argentine, or we want to be French, or we want to be Dutch, or we want to be German. We always want to be something else. So it seems like every time there's like a successful nation, all of a sudden the United States want to be a part of that. And growing up, I had Italian managers, English managers, Mexican managers, Honduran. I mean, I've learned how to play so many different styles because it's such a huge melting pot here in the United States. So much like the United States national team is kind of has this Dutch influence right now with Ernie Stewart and Greg Berhalter and some of the curriculum, the coaching curriculum. Major League Soccer was kind of taking the French Football Federation kind of curriculum. So we don't really know what we want. So the last couple of years, we've seen a little bit of a switch from American general managers who have experience playing in Major League Soccer to now Dutch or Belgian or European or Mexican or South American general managers coming in. And it was more about it seeming like the Rolodex with the experience. And I think that's why you're seeing guys like a Tata Martino, why you're seeing a Frank de Boer, while now you're seeing more of an influx of managers that are big stature managers, but also maybe failed in their last job and are looking to kind of reestablish themselves. Because you saw that with Frank de Boer last year with Atlanta. You're seeing it with Jaap Stam right now at FC Cincinnati. And maybe the biggest one, you're seeing it with Thierry Henry after the debacle in Monaco up at the Montreal Impact.
So, like another major problem, I think Zlatan had said that it's very costly to play football in the States. Yeah. Is that a major problem which is maybe hindering maybe people who cannot actually pay that amount of money?
He's not wrong. I just cut a check for $2,000 for my kid to play, both kids to play club soccer. So here's again kind of the age discrepancy when you're talking about football around the world. You're talking about institutions, soccer football institutions, that literally you've got the top tier teams, but you also have all of the local teams. That's not the case here in the United States. We have the MLS teams and you have some USL teams, and they're free to play for once you make it onto their team. But we don't have them in every single city because it's such a huge country. So what Zlatan is talking about, club soccer, if you're not playing for the LA Galaxy or LAFC, if you're not playing for Real Salt Lake or New York Red Bulls, if you're just playing for a local club, like my club here in Salt Lake City is, you have 4 clubs, but outside of Real Salt Lake. And my kids are 10 and 8. And so they don't even qualify for the academy yet. So we're having to pay to travel and to pay the coaches, but it's not just a soccer problem. The same thing traveling baseball, volleyball, football, basketball. The pay to play culture is here in all sports, gymnastics, karate. You pay for that, and you're paying for the instruction, you're paying for the clothing, you're paying for the tournaments. So in an ideal world, would you like to see that completely free? Absolutely. But who's going to pay the coaches? Who's going to pay for the training facilities? Who's going to pay for the tournaments? Who's going to pay the referees? Zlatan's right, but the one thing I will remind everybody, if you're good enough, the price, there's scholarship programs. Like for myself, I was paying for 2 kids that were from Iraq to play in the club for my kids. And I was the one paying for them. So, because they couldn't afford it. There's ways around it, but yes, to your initial question, you're going to inevitably miss out on some kids because not only the finances, but the travel. And I can remember very clearly, especially in my teenage years growing up, kids that I played with that couldn't go to practice because they were valeting cars at a hotel because that money would go back and help their parents pay for the bills. And, you know, that's, as we all know, some families are much better than other families, and sometimes the children have to get involved and try to help. So, yeah, very, very complex conversation, but Zlatan is not wrong. But I think that's also kind of a sporting climate here in the United States across the board.
So, like moving from that to maybe to your career, and I'll talk about your spell. You ventured out to play in Sweden in around 2004 for Bodens. How was your adventure there?
I loved it. I loved everything about it. I tried on a couple different occasions when I was near the end of my contract to go overseas in France and Germany. I had offers to play in Germany in the second Bundesliga before I signed with Major League Soccer. And I had even offers after the Olympics with opportunities, but it just never really materialized. So to go to Europe, at the time I was in a contract dispute with Major League Soccer. And when I was talking about Ruud Gullit and the rules, I was inadvertently punished because of some of those rules, which have now been rectified and changed because there was a couple players that were kind of caught underneath these MLS rules. When I went to Sweden, the political time in the United States, you had the war in Iraq happening. You had George Bush just being reelected president. And I remember one of my first days walking in downtown, there was they were burning American flags and they were burning George Bush like effigies. They had like stuffed George Bush and they were lighting him on fire. And it was like, you voted for George Bush. And I was like, no, I didn't. And it was kind of it was a weird time because politically, when I'd walk down the street, people would recognize I was American, or they would hear my voice and it'd be American. So it was kind of, that environment was interesting, and kind of having your eyes open from a cultural standpoint to how it was living in the United States versus how it was being viewed as an American in Europe, and the amount of information that we were given in Europe that was completely different than so that whole side was interesting. But then whether it was Bosnian, it was Polish, it was Finnish, it was Russian, it was African, it was Swedish, it was Norwegian, it was Danish, English. I'm trying to think who else we had on the team. Morocco, Assyria. We had so many different cultures, so many different religions, so many different languages, and none of it mattered. We had straight, we had bisexual, it didn't matter. It was just us. And we were playing for the city. And quite honestly, it was one of the best experiences. I had a couple opportunities to move on because I had such a great year with the club. And that was at the point where my under 20 assistant coach and my Olympic team head coach took a job at Real Salt Lake. And I came back and met my wife and had children. But it was almost like, should I have stayed? Should I have continued that European adventure? Because, like I told you in the beginning, the traveling and the culture, I kind of viewed my career as like a train. People would get on, people would get off, and I would just go to different stops and experience different cities. And I loved every moment of my time in Sweden.
So, you had experience at so many huge clubs in the States and also in Sweden and also the national team. Did you ever plan into getting into the coaching side of the game? No, I hated it. Because I was traded so much, I realized it didn't matter what I did. I could only control so much of what I did, and my performance was obviously the thing I could control the most.
but then even off the field, with the interaction with the fans and representing the club and being a part of the city, I could be traded at any moment. And there were times when I wanted to be traded, and there was times when I didn't want to be traded. Every time, the 2 times I bought houses in Columbus, Ohio, and here in Salt Lake, I was traded within the year. So it was like what the joke was in Major League Soccer: don't ever buy a house unless you want to jinx yourself and be traded within the year. So yeah, it was kind of weird time. So when my career came to an end, I realized very quickly that if I was uncomfortable as a player, recognizing that somebody had control over my life, imagine being a manager where it doesn't matter how hard I work or how hard my staff works. At the end of the day, it's about the player performance. And it could be something as easy as a yellow card or a red card or a deflection for an own goal or a referee error that could cost me my job. And I think for me, I've always been more interested in building a club as opposed to being a manager. And so I think if I was ever to kind of dip my toes into that, and I've been offered a couple different jobs, I think more of a general manager role would be something I'd be interested in.
So the next one is even more lighter question. And if you would not have been a footballer, what would you have been?
I have no idea. And I'm not trying. It's a great question. I'm not trying to dismiss it. I honestly don't know. I told my parents when I was 12 years old that I was going to be a professional footballer, and they were like, "Yeah, okay, cool. Like, yeah, okay, good job, man. I hope it works out for you." And it's just that's everything that I wanted to be. I played all the sports: baseball, football, basketball, all those things. I was out on my bike every day in the mountains. Like, I just always wanted to be outside. But I think every professional athlete has that. We call it the Michael Jordan thing, where you've been cut by a team. Every athlete has that moment in time when they've been told they're not good enough. And I think for me, it was when I was 12, and I was okay. I'm going to prove everybody wrong. And I think from that moment, like I had like horse goggles on. I could only see straight ahead. So quite honestly, I don't know. I couldn't even ask myself that question until after I retired. And at that point, I was already 29 years old.
So, if you had to choose one standout moment from your career, what would that be?
I would say that it would be walking out of the tunnel in Sydney, Australia, listening to the FIFA anthem, going into the bronze medal match. Like that jersey, that game. That was, and that's why I seem so pretentious with my jersey on the back of the wall. It's just that's that moment in time. Like I hit the post, left-footed ball comes in on a corner, I smash it with my left, hits the crossbar, hits the post, comes out. They go down the opposite way and score. And it was like kind of like the national team was like that close to having a bronze medal in my hand, because we had never gotten out of the group stage as a country. Yeah, I think just that moment, like the pride of representing your national team, representing your family, representing your nation, knowing that all the eyeballs are on you, knowing that, for us as Americans, you put your hand on your chest. And I couldn't even put my hands on my chest because my heart was beating too. So I like had my hand like that far off because I didn't want to be that nervous. Yeah, I would say that just walking down the tunnel is something that I can still think about. And I still dream about that I'm a soccer player. I'm just old and slow now every single night.
So, compared to when you played or even one generation after that, you have the newer generation right now who are playing at elite clubs all over the world, actually, from US. What would be the realistic expectation for them, going forward?
Yeah, I would say nothing short of qualifying for the World Cup is the first expectation, because I don't think we ever thought that with how easy the CONCACAF nation is, how easy it is qualifying, and it is very, very easy, that you would have such a significant step backwards that literally changed the entire soccer federation, U.S. Soccer Federation, and changed from the national team all the way down. I mean, everybody that was involved is out. I mean, and it took a year and a half, 2 years to get that done, but it's a whole new U.S. Soccer Federation, coaches from the national team all the way down. This next generation, obviously Christian Pulisic, Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, Gio Reyna, Borussia Dortmund breaking through. We have high expectations, but the one thing I always kind of remind people for how easy CONCACAF is, and this is for every region, the difficulty in travel, to go to Mexico, to go to Honduras, to go to Panama, to go to Jamaica, to go to Trinidad, to play on artificial surface, to play in 100-degree heat with kind of the sun right on top of you, the grass like a foot long, the referees where you feel like they don't like America, they're calling fouls again, all those things. There's almost a cultural experience that's needed for qualifying that I think this group doesn't necessarily have right now. And a part of that is missing out on so many Olympics. I mean, we've only, since the 2000 Olympic group in Australia, we've only qualified for the Olympics once. And that was in China back in 2008. And we failed in 04. Well, we failed in 12. We failed in 16. We were about to go into qualifying again before the pandemic hit. And so we've missed out on like 3 generations of players that have played in their age group with kind of a formula of a World Cup. And I think that's a big hindrance. That's a big miss on experience. And so much like missing out on the Olympics because of qualifying, failure to qualify, there's a significant threat of missing out on the World Cup because of the I don't want to say naive, but inexperience in qualifying, how to play on the road, how to put your foot on the throat of the opponent and see out a game. So I would say, and it sounds crazy, but I would say I'm more excited for this next generation for 2026 when Mexico, the United States, and Canada host, as opposed to Qatar, because it's going to be difficult to get there. And I think this group is going to have some significant growing pains throughout the qualifying phase.
So, if you had to give one piece of advice to maybe the captain of the US 2000 Olympics team, what would you give him?
Create a locker room environment that's competitive, trusting, has self-belief, but also isn't afraid to throw a punch every once in a while. And I know like the idea of physical violence is like a no-fly zone, but there has to be a challenge. There has to be a culture that you can call each other out for the betterment of the group. And at times, some of the best players are the ones that you have to keep in check. And some of the role players are the ones with the biggest attitudes. So I would say you have to create that environment that everybody can thrive in, because I think that's the most important. Because you don't, as we know with every team, you can insert whatever big team, country name. They're not all friends. You don't all have to like each other, but you have to know that the moment that you cross that white line and step onto the field, that you're battling for something bigger than just kind of your individual desire.
So, on that note, Brian, I'll ask you one final question. It's quite difficult, okay? It will be difficult for you. It's even probably more difficult than that Olympics game. So,
okay.
If you had a choice to select one of the 2 players, whom would you select? Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo?
Easy, Messi. But I figured out how to explain this. If you like Cristiano Ronaldo, you're confident, you're bravado, right? You're outgoing. You have figured out a way to kind of be a role player and a team player, but you want to be the superstar, right? With Lionel Messi, you're kind of shy, you're a little bit quiet, you're a little bit meek, but when competition comes, you're there, right? You are a superstar, but you're not out there to be the superstar that you're going to flaunt it. You're not going to put it out there. So I was having this conversation with my boys. I think the most important out of those two is if you can find a mix, find a balance, where you're not completely out there cocky, but you're not completely out there kind of like going about your business. But for me, yeah, Lionel Messi, I for my 10th wedding anniversary, my wife and I went to Europe and we went to Barcelona, and I said, whatever we do, we have to go to one game. You have to see Lionel Messi play live. That's it. I don't care. We can do whatever you want to do, but we have to go to a game. We went to Barcelona, Sevilla, and Messi scored 2 goals. And she looked at me and she goes, I get it. I understand. But quick side note, I actually played against Cristiano Ronaldo when he was at Sporting Lisbon. And he was just a kid, teenager, like 16, 17. And he had the bright orange vapors, and he was flying, and he was playing against Frankie Haydock, guy with the long hair for the national team, the surfer dude back in the day. And they were just going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. And I was getting tired just watching it. But you could tell he was something special. And I have nothing but the utmost respect for what he's done throughout his career, because he is an absolute machine, and his desire to win and compete is nothing short of extraordinary. So, yeah, I'm a Messi guy when it's all said and done.
So, on that note, Brian, thank you so much for talking to me, and I wish you all the best for your future endeavors with media and everything you're doing. So once again, thank you so much, and it was an honor talking to you. Take care. Bye.
Yes. Same. Looking forward to the next one. Thank you.